A lot of Americans today foolishly believe that our government and our legal system were based on the story of the Ten Commandments, a covenant between two fictional characters, Moses and Jehovah, or they believe that our country was based on biblical values, as if there ever was such a thing. And you don't have to know much history to know that that's wrong, but the more that you know, the more wrong it is. And contrary to what many Americans now believe, the United States was initially founded as the first explicitly secular government. And I know that everyone else in the world understands that, but many Americans tell me that they think that our country was founded by God. And some have even told me exactly that. So, and my wife wanted me to mention something about Marco Rubio, another one of these candidates. He said that our nation was founded on the slogan, "In God We Trust," even though that slogan didn't come into existence until 180 years after the country was founded. But what do you expect somebody to be ruling the country to know what country he's in or where it started? So our actual human founders included some influential leaders who were neither Christian nor fond of Christians. As a matter of fact, some of our founding fathers wrote scathing condemnation of Christianity. But even those of our founders who were Christians understood firsthand what happens whenever religion acquires rule over law. The result has always been an automatic violation of human rights. This is what theocracy always does until such time as it loses its power and its influence over a hopefully wiser populace who will no longer tolerate such oppression. And the only time religion is polite is when it's in power. And the more people are compliant, the more power that it has. And this is why the very name of Islam, for example, commands submission. So, while our pre-Darwinian Declaration of Independence and our national constitution do have vague deistic references to a creator, also described as nature's God, there is no mention of Jesus in either document. Nature's God is a deistic reference, and where Christians may imagine that the later reference to the divine providence may refer to Jesus, a Muslim or a Jew might just as well assume that it refers to the Father God instead, or a Hindu, Sikh, or pantheist might have a different interpretation of God altogether, including the God of Einstein and Spinoza, which is not really a God at all, but the collective of the laws of nature. So our founding documents were deliberately ambiguous, being worded the way that they were for that reason, to accommodate any religion or none. And Americans are keen on the Second Amendment to the Constitution. That's the one that guarantees our right to bear arms. But they seem to ignore the First Amendment, which is what guarantees freedom of religion, where Congress can make no law, even respecting the establishment of religion, and where simultaneously they refuse to prohibit the free exercise thereof. And one thing that my countrymen very often fail to understand is that once a nation establishes a state religion, it inevitably also enforces or imposes that religion, which invariably compromises all the others. So it is not possible to have freedom of religion without having freedom from religion. And in most America, this is why the First Amendment contradicts the First Commandment. And when I pointed this out to a number of Americans, they got agitated because they don't realize that that is even the case. Our founding fathers were an elite league of wealthy aristocrats, having been very well educated at a time when most people never got a secondary education, if they got a primary one. And the fact that so many of our founding fathers had such disdain against religious faith caused a backlash in the common laity. So that very early in our history, there began a repeated series or waves of religious revivalism. The advantage of faith over reason is that reason requires understanding, which usually requires education, which requires an investment of time and money and intelligent comprehension and accurate source material vetted by scholars. But religion needs none of that because it's just talking out of your ass. Making empty assertions, pretending to know what no one even can know, and believing impossible nonsense for no good reason. It allows the lowliest idiot to pretend that he is wiser than the wise, ignoring all indications otherwise. and pretending that you'll live forever and that you have a direct connection to the ear of the most powerful being imaginable. Someone who can even make 2 + 2 equal the square root of -1, if that's what it takes. And a desperate emotional state will accept irrational answers, especially when they don't know any better and don't want to, which is very often the case. We believe different things for different reasons. I believe what I do is a logical consequence of my knowledge of the facts, and my position or my belief will obligately change according to my understanding. Evidence is, for me, the only reason anyone should believe anything. And I think that beliefs should be tentative whenever possible, that a firm conviction should be reserved for when the evidence is indisputable and overwhelming. That whenever there could be a doubt, there should be. And that's what skepticism is. Critical thinking so as not to be fooled. As I understand it, a fool is one who too readily accepts improbable claims from questionable sources on insufficient evidence, or one who believes completely such claims without any doubt, which is what the religious scriptures require. So it's not at all surprising that the Bible and the Quran both use the opposite definition of fool than dictionaries do. Both say you're a fool if you don't gullibly swallow it all and believe it completely on faith just because they said so. These books say this because they're trying to fool you, obviously. They're both questionable sources, making outrageously dubious claims without any evidence at all, and all of their leverage, governing communities, collecting tithes, restricting or regulating everyone's personal life, all depends on duping the stooges. It's literally make-believe because they need to make you believe. Deception is the source of all their power. But if you believe whatever you're told, without question, without reservation, or without reason, then by definition, you are a fool. And I suspect that the men who wrote these and other holy books pretending to speak for God must have known that, and that's why they tried to reverse the definition. What I see as a division, we're at the extremes. We have one group with a deep-seated emotional need to believe, and on the other, we have someone with a desire to understand. And those who want to understand will inquire, and those who don't, won't. That's why it is that whenever a believer leaves a religion, those in his faction will ostracize or bastardize that person, but they never question what was it that changed their mind. And on the other side, on the relatively rare occasion that somebody walks away from, an unbeliever adopts a religion, their reason why is usually the only thing we care about. We want to know. And that's why when you're trying to explain science to irrational believers, they seem to be deliberately or willfully obtuse. They're trying to keep confused. It's a conscious effort to maintain a misunderstanding because they want to believe something else, and they need to assure themselves of that somehow. And logical fallacies are sufficient because they're striving for any excuse they can get. And if you press them, to teach them, to get them to accept a particular premise or one concept at a time, they will stop you and very often admit that they don't want to know, they just want to believe. Now, I have no choice but to believe whatever I want. I can only believe what is indicated, but religious extremists have shown and admitted that belief for them is an act of will, of mind over matter, through the power of positive thought, as if wishes might come true if you can believe hard enough. And some people say that they want to believe with all their heart, which means to me that they're pretending. They're trying to convince themselves, or perhaps trying to fool themselves. And I've heard ministers, people I know, who have defended this with the colloquialism, fake it till you make it. Pretend to believe until you really do believe. Which means lie to yourself and others if that's what it takes. Faith is just willfully ignorant, auto-deceptive self-delusion. And sometimes when I've pointed out some inconvenient truth that disproves their point, believers will respond by saying that I'm hurting people. That these may be what the facts are, but I prefer to believe this. And when they say that, they're making an admission that they don't care what the truth really is. And this doesn't apply to everyone, of course, because probably most people were born into it, indoctrinated early, and never questioned it, because everyone around them believes the same thing, so it must be right, right? But many times, religious people, or deeply religious people, have told me that they believe what they do because they have to, or because they derive comfort from it somehow, or they're afraid not to. And even on some level, if they admit that they know that it's not really true, they said we should believe it anyway. Even if we know that it's not really true, we should still believe it because that'll somehow make us a better person. And we know that it doesn't, of course. I mean, if you compare the most religious and the least religious communities, you'll see that the crime rate and so on indicates that belief in God doesn't make you a good person. Statistically, the opposite is true, but these people want to believe, or they believe what they want simply because they want. But it's hard to make up whatever you want to believe and really convince yourself of that. On your own alone, you might doubt yourself. And if you believe something different than what everybody else does, then you would be considered crazy. So you have to make believe the same nonsense as everyone else around you. And the more people who share and encourage a particular delusion, the easier it is to pretend that it's all really real. And you can't have anyone ruining the fantasy. So everybody's got to believe, and that means that you've got to elect leaders and judges who believe the same way. And it's always been this way throughout the course of human history, except for a few shining moments of secularism, like when our country was founded. But we fell back into that immediately and got really religious after that. Our first unambiguously Trinitarian Christian president was Andrew Jackson, our sixth president in 1828. But every president after him, with the possible exception of Abraham Lincoln, has been an avowed believer. It has been said that you cannot win an election in the United States if you don't profess to be a believer first. And even Bernie Sanders recently had to claim a religious faith that he seems not to have, at least not the way I understand those words. Our federal Constitution, written in 1787, says that no religious test will ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust in the United States. The Texas State Constitution, written in 1876, some 90 years later, also says that no candidate shall have any religious test, provided they acknowledge a supreme being. So to put that another way, the Texas State Constitution doesn't care what religion you are as long as you are religious. And if you subscribe to no religion at all, you may be barred from public office. And we've been trying to get an unbeliever elected so that we can challenge this in the courts. But in Texas, no one can get the vote if they don't profess to be a Bible-believing Christian first. And you have to move your head and have big hair and have the accent, or you won't be convincing. Maybe if you eat a booger on stage, somebody will get it. So, fast forward a few years to 1925 and the Scopes monkey trial. Now, at this time, it was illegal to teach evolution in public schools. After a few successful contests in court, we get to 1987, where evolution is now legal and it has suddenly become illegal to teach creationism. And this event is what I think started what the conservative Christian Republicans call or the fundamentalists rather, call the culture war. Something that most of us weren't even aware was going on. Our science advances, but in an environment inundated with superstitious believers. And that's where I come in. I became an advocate or an activist advocating science education when I realized how the creationist movement was attempting to undermine science, especially in public schools. So 20% of our teachers in Texas are young earth creationists and are incapable of performing the task. And many are willing to lie to their students in order to control what they believe. Case in point, my son's science teacher told the class that there was never any such thing as a beneficial mutation. He raised his hand to say, "But teacher, the textbook lists beneficial mutations." And he was sent to the office for that. Secular teachers often don't understand evolution well enough to teach it and may not want to personally promote it because students are trained by their church groups to disrupt the class with citations of logical fallacies and pseudoscience. Otherwise, teachers might also face condemnation from parents, and they may risk reactions from their associates and administrators. While this is difficult to prove, we do know that at least some teachers have been fired for promoting evolution, even though that's part of their job. So most, of course, will completely avoid it. Creationism is a form of religious extremism requiring a degree of reality denial. Every creationist organization posts a statement of faith as if this were something to be proud of, wherein they admit that they will automatically and thoughtlessly reject any and all evidence there could ever be if it conflicts with their interpretation of Bronze Age folklore. So they've already admitted, or they have admitted that they have already rejected all the evidence that could ever manifest, such that no matter how true the truth really is, no amount of proof will ever change their minds. And creationists reject evolution specifically, but more importantly, they reject methodological naturalism, an integral aspect of the scientific method. They want to replace that in some fields of study with a belief in magic. Now, they don't believe, or they don't admit that they believe in magic. They say they believe in miracles. However, the words miracles and magic share the same definition, that being the evocation of supernatural forces or entities to control or forecast natural events in ways that are inexplicable by science because they defy the laws of nature. Somehow they think that anything that science can't explain is explained by religion. Aha! You can't explain that, therefore God. As if God is made of what we don't know. As if unexplained means explained by magic. And even the things that science does explain, if that explanation is complicated, then religion still wins, because belief in magic wishes is much easier answer than something complex or convoluted. And it's easier to sate the mind who can't or won't understand otherwise. And remember that a lot of these people don't want to know what the reality is. They think that criticizing natural explanations somehow proves the supernatural. That if you think that evolution is impossible, that somehow makes a magical creation possible. They don't understand they're limited to dichotomies. They don't understand the concept of the null set, that gods and magic are not the default position. They're an unsupported assertion where there's no reason to even consider them. And understand that positive claims require positive evidence, even when you're talking about a God. You can still pretend that there's a God. You have a right to believe that. But without evidence to show if you're right, then you literally don't know what you're talking about. It is dishonest to assert as fact that which is not evidently true, yet that's what all religions do. A religion has always been a means of manipulation of the masses, and they do this by indoctrination of faith, usually targeting young children before they reach the age of reason. Because if you wait until they're after 8 or more years old, and then you tell them about Noah's Ark, and sticks turning into snakes, and the sun stopping in the sky, and especially Adam and Eve, and all of this information causes them to have to unknow everything that they already know to be true, then you're going to have a hell of a time trying to brainwash that kid. But religious indoctrination stumps the intellectual processes. So if you get them early enough, you can seize their logical development, get them to accept all kinds of impossible nonsense, and they may never develop the ability to question that. And it's not enough that they deceive their own children, because if yours is the only kids on the block who believe in talking snakes and donkeys and a tower to heaven and guys living inside fish, then through peer pressure alone, they won't believe that for very long. So their peers all have to believe it too. And consequently, Christian schools have sprung up not only all over Texas, but all over the entire country, so that all these children will hear only Bible lessons as if it was real, and none of them will ever hear about evolution. But that wasn't enough either. Religion is a delusion that wants to infect everyone. In 1999, the Discovery Institute, an organization dedicated to making creationism seem scientific, accidentally leaked a secret memo not intended for worldwide distribution. It was called the Wedge Document. It detailed a long-term agenda to defeat scientific materialism and its destructive moral, cultural, and political legacies, and to replace materialistic explanations with the theistic understanding that nature and human beings were created by God. And they meant to replace evolution with creationism in every school, including all the public schools all across the country. And this plan was called the Wedge because they intended to use pseudoscience arguments to cast doubt on evolution and create an opening for religious beliefs and rejection of material science. Their ultimate goal was to reshape the entire culture by promoting evangelical Protestant Christian fundamentalism in every level of society, including government. The wedge document from the Discovery Institute mirrored the goals of other fundamentalist organizations like the Chalcedon Institute, which, I'm sorry to say, is the source of many of our current senators. The Chalcedon Institute had a goal of eventually, slowly, and legally and peacefully taking over the entirety of government and replacing that with a theocracy capable of enforcing biblical law. And by that they specified, they meant the barbaric book of Leviticus, where women could be killed for being raped and where homosexuals would be killed as an abomination. It was the Christian version of Sharia law, and this group ran from the 1960s through the 1990s. A number of their affiliates are connected with other devoutly religious hate groups and subordinate groups like the Rutherford Institute, which was founded by Chalcedon for the purpose of getting evangelical Christians elected in all areas of government, again with the intent that they completely take over political conventions. And information on all these conspiracies are available in their own words on multiple websites, and to some degree, they have succeeded, although still short of being able to enforce biblical law. A lot of this is being funded by very wealthy conservatives. For example, the Koch brothers. This is a family of billionaires who have hundreds of millions of dollars and that they've donated to evangelical organizations and different political organizations. Recently, for example, there was a public admission from within that the Republican Party is controlled by the Koch brothers. And back home in Texas, we have our own financier of fundamentalism. James Leininger had a couple $100 million, which he famously donated in bits to a number of different increments to various politicians at various levels in an attempt to change public policy. And he is the reason that we have a Republican majority in the state Supreme Court. He's also a fan of school vouchers, and that's where the money that comes from the government that is intended to support public schools is rerouted to private schools and Christian schools. And this contributes to underfunded public schools without improving performance. Charter schools perform no better than public schools when poverty is eliminated from the equation. And meanwhile, charter schools are not regulated properly and are prone to corruption, and the private schools, overwhelmingly, are fundamentalist Christian schools teaching that the Bible is the only source of truth in our world. So with the voucher system, you end up with the public schools having the underprivileged kids only, or having the better performing kids statistically in most situations having been removed from those schools. In this way, the Republicans can go against the Constitution. We have a statement in the Constitution requiring that we give a free education. And they can't change that unless they can prove that the schools have failed. And so they can't say that the schools have failed unless they can bring it about in a self-fulfilling prophecy. So James Leininger has also paid tens of thousands of dollars each to seat right-wing Republican Christian conservatives on our state Board of Education. Texas has a board of panelists who select and approve all their school books, but they don't just select from the books that are already there. They also request revisions, rewording, tweaking, paraphrasing, wherever they think they can in order to get out their message. Publishers can't ignore these changes because Texas is such a big state with so many metropolitan areas that we are the second largest buyer of school books. And so they will cower to our demands, and the version they print for us becomes the one that they distribute through the rest of the country as well. So that this handful of usually undereducated amateurs, volunteers, end up governing what everyone learns all across the country. So Leininger gave up to $20,000 each to elect people who had no appreciable education themselves and no competence for the job. And our governor, whom Leininger also placed, and I'm talking about Rick Perry now, has also repeatedly chosen the most extreme fundamentalists on the board to sit as chair. And the result of that has been an international embarrassment as legions of science and historian experts are rejected in their testimonies by a dentist who thinks he can stand up to experts. And I had a debate with this guy, the dentist, once upon a time. He was supposed to moderate a public debate between me and a couple of evangelical ministers, and one of them admitted that he knew there were transitional species in the fossil record, but he wanted to teach students that there were none. Because, he said, it is important that they believe there are none. So here again we have another admission that it doesn't matter what the truth really is, and it's okay to lie to other people's children in order to control what they believe. So just before the Wedge document was released, I had already heard from a number of fundamentalists bragging that they had positioned various senators and judges, that their church groups had done this, for the next stage of their culture war. And this next stage had been planned out for many years and was detailed in the Wedge document when it finally came out. What they wanted to do was to have judges elected all over the country who were fundamentalists, who were friendly to creationist beliefs, so that they could eventually countersue whenever anyone wanted to dispute the false information that they were being taught to their kids. This was all arranged by the Discovery Institute, which is not a scientific organization, but rather a league of lawyers. A league of lawyers determined to promote their religion even when they know it's wrong. And they wanted to perpetuate this in public schools. So this finally happened in Dover, Pennsylvania. The creationists on the board in schools there did not want to hear about evolution or Darwin. They encouraged their school board to adopt a creationist textbook, or an intelligent design textbook called Of Pandas and People. Now, the purpose of the term intelligent design was to create the illusion that there was a scientific objection to evolution. They'd already tried it once before with another concept called creation science. But in 1987, the courts realized that that was religious propaganda, and that's why it became illegal to teach creationism in public schools. So the religion is relentless, and having lost that case, they simply rebranded it with the same book, curiously. So investigators I'm getting ahead of myself. To give you a better idea, let me see, about the illusion that they try to present. I was in a studio in Dallas for a TV show discussing comparative worldviews. And on one side of the panel, they had an evolutionist, as if accepting scientific evidence is comparable to a religious belief. And on the other side, they had a creationist. And in the middle, they had another creationist, but they wouldn't call him a creationist. They called him an intelligent design theorist, and they tried very hard to create this illusion that it was something else, that it was something different. So, investigators at the Dover trial discovered that Pandas and People had been published in multiple editions, including prior to 1987 when it became illegal to teach creationism. And they compared the verbiage in the old versions versus the new versions, and they discovered that whenever the word creationism originally appeared, it had been replaced with intelligent design. And whenever the word creationists originally appeared, that had been replaced by design proponents. In fact, there was a misspelling at one point that confused the macro command so that it read "C design proponentsists." This was the only change they made in the whole book. So it's very clear what they were doing. They were deliberately lying in order to get around the law. And they knew full well what they were doing. And this is the definition for intelligent design and creationism are the same thing. They are the same thing, and creationists are still lying about that, because it is not possible to defend creationism honestly. But it wasn't enough that they caught their witnesses lying multiple times. They had to prove that there was no truth to any of their claims. And this is the part where they thought that having a Bush-appointed conservative Republican Christian judge would assure their success, because creationists never admit when they've been proven wrong. However, this judge was a moderate Christian and a proper judge. Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean that you're so extremist that you're going to deny reality. And this judge lamented that many of these people would so proudly tout their religious convictions in public, and yet time and again lie to cover their tracks and conceal the true agenda of the ID policy. Now, Dr. Michael Behe was the only biologist willing to attempt a defense of intelligent design on trial. He confidently asserted that science will never find an evolutionary explanation for the immune system. But the judge noted that he was presented with 58 peer-reviewed publications, 9 books, and several immunology textbook chapters about the evolution of the immune system. However, he simply insisted that this was still not sufficient evidence of evolution and that it was not good enough. The court also ruled that all of the testable claims of intelligent design had been refuted and rejected by the scientific community. So the science deniers didn't get the ruling they wanted. But over the years since then, they have exploited a number of loopholes in the different state laws, so that in various places across our country, we now have thousands of schools that will not teach evolution, and thousands more that teach the Bible as if it were a matter of scientific and historic fact. These lessons typically involve anti-Semitism, denigration of other religions, a rejection of science, and the instilling of right-wing conservative political ideologies, which is what this is really all about. To make that worse, there was a program called the Good News Club. This is a religious program using public school property for full-tilt evangelizing to very young children, often regardless of parental consent. These were disguised as after-school activities. So the parents have no idea that their children are being preached at, and when the parents finally realize what is going on and they try to correct it, now the student has been tainted against them, warned what their parents will say, and how to resist their own parents in their religious beliefs. But the culture war isn't just about instilling extreme religious dogmatism. It's about impressing the oppression, repression, practices, and politics consistent with religious fundamentalism. And in Texas, that meant no more sex education. Instead, they teach abstinence only. And my wife was teaching a class in middle school, a bunch of typically 12-year-olds and such, where they had a state-funded conservative Christian come in to address the class to lie to them, to tell them, among other things, that oral sex didn't feel good. Because you're so worried about getting a sexually transmitted disease that you can't enjoy the blowjob. Again, we have an admission that they have no compunction against lying to kids. Abstinence only is the idea that any pill can be a birth control pill if the girl holds it between her knees. Seriously, all they do is tell teenagers not to have sex, as if that would work. That all you have to do is deny one of the strongest urges any biological organism has, and you have to do that at the peak of its social and hormonal influence over your life, and you have to do that without any understanding of it. We're not going to give you any useful information because we're afraid you'll use it. The abstinence-only program brags that they are the only 100% effective way to prevent pregnancies and sexually transmitted diseases. However, just before we left Texas to come here, I saw a news story that one high school was reporting an outbreak of chlamydia. And since this program had been implemented, Texas has the second highest rate of teen pregnancies and the highest rate of repeat teen pregnancies. And this, of course, is associated with the fact that we also have one of the highest rates of childhood poverty. And to make another negative feedback loop, the Republican Party in power in Texas has also tried their very best to close down every abortion clinic and also all of the benefit programs that would have helped unwed mothers and teen mothers and so forth. So it's not enough that, and I have to brag about something. President Obama recently, like a week or two ago, cut funding for the abstinence-only program so that, because the federal government was paying for that, despite what a cataclysm, what an atrocious failure that program has been. And so it's not enough that kids are poor and pregnant and have no idea how things really work. It's not enough that they're religious. The system that did that ultimately wants to control how they vote, so that they'll elect extreme militant patriots wrapped in a flag and carrying a cross, the very people you see running for office now. And don't you think it's wonderful when like 4 different people say that God told them to run for president this year? Isn't it even funnier when none of those people make it to the end? So what would Jesus do? He would probably vote for the Jewish socialist, I think. So now how do you inspire this level of jingoism? And the only way to do that is, of course, through fear and lies. So George Orwell's most famous book, 1984, says that those who control the past control the future. So, of course, our Board of Indoctrination must also alter our history. The goal there was to promote American exceptionalism. And that means that we teach that America's values and political system are unique in all the world, as if our history was guided by manifest destiny, or so they would like to believe. And consequently, inconvenient moments in our colorful past are often distorted, deleted, censored, or embellished with the expressed intent, and I've actually heard people phrase it this way, that the United States of America must always be seen as a shining beacon of what it means to be God-blessed. And this explanation was given as a reason why we're not going to talk about certain things we'd rather not admit to, because we don't want anybody to think that the United States has ever made any mistakes. As if our country was founded by God as a guide for the rest of the countries of the world. So, of course, our history books credit Christianity for everything good that ever happened, and our embarrassing past with slavery and civil rights and other atrocities are downplayed as if they maybe weren't really so bad, or maybe didn't happen at all. Rather than admit that the Civil War was fought over slavery, they say it was fought over states' rights, and slaves are hardly mentioned. Some of our books even describe the slaves as workers. In Texas, these classes are often called social studies because it's a blend of cultural ancestry, but our social studies textbooks have eliminated most references to indigenous peoples and people of other ethnicities. For example, when a textbook once said hip-hop music, it now says country western. And everything has been reworded so that it seems that only white people ever did anything important. They even tried to remove any reference to our Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall because they didn't want to have any black respected leaders in positions of authority. And while these books promote segregation, and they never say anything negative about the Ku Klux Klan, there's a Louisiana textbook, next state over from us, that describes the KKK as respected community leaders promoting morality. Louisiana uses Christian textbook, including the Bible itself, to promote paranoid and prejudiced propaganda, to instill right-wing religious ideology, including hatred of gays, liberals, and otherwise celebrated thinkers like Emily Dickinson and Mark Twain. One of Louisiana's history textbooks actually describes Mark Twain as a confused hack. There's also one saying that homosexuality should be treated as a capital crime, and that the goal of environmentalism isn't to preserve our resources for future generations, but rather the goal of environmentalism is to destroy the economies of the world's richest nations. Think about that when you buy a Tesla. I'm bringing down the government somehow. And according to one high school textbook, the existence of the Loch Ness Monster disproves evolution. Nationwide, our children are taught that the Founding Fathers were Christian when many were not, and that our Constitution was based on a biblical story of the Ten Commandments, but there's no truth to that at all. Our history books now say that Moses was a real person, that he was born in the 13th century BCE, and he's listed first among the authors to have inspired the framers of the Constitution. And this birth in the 1200s or the 1300s, this comes contrary to all those scholars who can't agree on when he should have lived, and it certainly goes contest against all those scholars who say he didn't live at all, and he really couldn't have. And it's not just the biblical scholars who say this. Of course, the archaeologists agree almost unanimously that the way the Bible describes the Exodus is not the way it happened, if it happened at all. We, of course, know that that couldn't have happened either, and I'll be happy to talk about that later, the reasons why. But our history books back the Bible. And I want to mention something else here. Yeah. The fact is that the founders, the supposedly Christian founders who supposedly based our country on all these religious principles, were obviously, famously, adamantly against the type of government that is associated with Moses. And if Moses existed, he certainly would have objected to anything democratic. Our books now say that the political thinking of the framers of the Constitution was influenced by Judeo-Christian religious heritage, where our laws and our rights come from God. However, if gays and atheists have equal rights in one country but not in another, then this is proof that it didn't come from God, or else it'd be the same everywhere in the world. If a woman has a right to drive in one country but not in another, then this is proof that that right was granted by human legislators in recent times. And I know all this seems obvious, but you should see me trying to explain this to Americans. So none of that is factually correct, and this is easy to prove, but it doesn't matter that we can prove that all these things are lies, because every kid is being taught this everywhere across the country again and again and again from every authority figure they know. And it's impossible to reach all those children to undo the damage. And many Americans don't realize they've been lied to until they go to college, if they do, which, because my country doesn't respect higher education the way we used to, and they don't respect academic expertise either. That's why if a majority, the vast majority of all the world's scientists reach a consensus on evolution or climate change or sustainable energy or some other unpopular notion, believers will simply dismiss it, as if the bigoted, uneducated, ignorant laity somehow know better than all the world's best educated expert specialists anywhere ever. So if you've been following our political circus and you're stunned with the ineptitude of our various presidential candidates, wondering what's gone wrong with America, this is it. And they found a way to perpetuate it. The denigration the denigration of education, imprinting political propaganda with state-endorsed and imposed systematic, system-wide conservative Christian religious indoctrination, turning us all into sheep.